Hey gang, it's Thursday, December 30th. Listeners, welcome to the Behind the Numbers Daily Holiday Special, a new marketer podcast made possible by Basis Technologies. I'm Marcus. Today's holiday fact, I've got two for you. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer was originally created as an advertising gimmick. According to the Smithsonian Insider, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer appeared, and you can't say that without wanting to sing the song, okay? So let me just say that. First appeared in 1939, Rudolph did, when Montgomery Ward department store asked one of its copywriters, 34-year-old Robert L. May, to create a Christmas story the store could give away to shoppers as a promotional gimmick. And thus, Rudolph was born, with Montgomery Ward distributing 2.4 million copies of the story in the first year of its publication. So now that I've ruined Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer for you, the second fact, Santa has a postal code in Canada. This is too good. If you are in Canada and want to get in touch with Mr. Santa Claus, you can send him a letter via the Canada Post mail system. The address, of course, Santa Claus, North Pole, HOHOHO. Ho ho ho. But split into too good. Canada is the last part of the address. And don't be surprised when you get a letter back. He has some helpers who keep up with his correspondence. I'm absolutely sending him a letter. I've got to. We need to talk. Anyway, on today's episode, and all this week in fact, we've been bringing you some of our favorite conversations from the year. And on today's episode, we start with an episode from earlier this year that looked at what the media world will look like in 2030, looking at digital ads, shopping, and banks. And in the second half, we keep looking into the future to see what 2030 will look like with regards to pay TV, digital video, and esports. Hey gang, Monica, Shalene, Cindy, Oscar, and listeners, welcome to the Behind the Numbers Daily, a new marketer podcast. I'm Marcus, and today I'm joined by so many people. We have a bunch of forecasting folks with us. Let's go through them. We have with us one of our directors of forecasting, it's Cindy Liu.
Hi guys.
Hello there. Another director of forecasting, Oscar Orozco.
Hey Marcus.
Hey chap, we also have a senior director of forecasting, Shalene Shum.
Hi everyone.
Hey Shalene. And finally, we have the person who runs the team, head of forecasting, it's Monica Pitt.
Thanks for having us, Marcus.
Thanks for being here, folks. So, what will the world look like in 2030? Andrew S. Winston of the MIT Sloan Management Review thinks that a few things. One, there will be about 1 billion more people in the world. Great. India will overtake China as the most populated country on Earth. Nigeria will overtake the US as the third most populated country in the world. There will be over 1 billion people who are over the age of 65, since we'll be living a little bit longer. Half of the global new cars will be electric, says UBS, and we might even be ready to move humans towards Mars, thinks Ellen Stefan, former chief scientist at NASA. But what will the world of media look like in 2030? Well, who better to ask than a group of forecasters? So I asked our forecasting team what they thought. Monica, we already have forecasts that stretch out to 2025.
Right.
I asked you guys to push even further out to 2030. How did you approach this question and manage to come back with some thoughts on what the world might look like then?
Yeah, this was a really interesting and fun exercise, Marcus. And when you asked us about it, we, immediately said, well, we have forecasts to this point, but then...
Is that not good enough for you, Marcus?
Right.
2025 isn't far enough.
Stretching it out a bit more is, stretching our powers as forecasters, of course. But it's definitely maybe as interesting as some of the other predictions you were just mentioning from lots of experts around the globe and around different industries. But for media, we approach this usually by looking at lots of data, tons of data, and pulling in every data point that we can find to say how how much will be happening, how much money will be transacting, how many people will be doing XYZ. And that requires a bit of a layered approach. While we're looking at, maybe one topic in forecasts, we might have other forecasts that have an input on that same topic. Mm-hmm. And we might have lots of a series of data points that we have to pull in to make sense of it. For something like this, we're in a good position because we already have forecasts. So we're leaning into what those forecasts have already said, at least through the next 4 to 5 years, and extrapolating those trends, those same trends, to the next 5 years and saying, okay, if those things remain constant through 2030, what would that look like? So we're doing a bit of a pared down methodology, as it were, just to look at what would our current trends produce if we were to extend our forecast that far into the future. And that's pretty typical for us.
Right. Yeah, Monica, to what you said a bit earlier on, there's a good chance, that things will happen and we'll knock these forecasts off course, just like with anything that, we can't prepare. We can't account for every eventuality. Right. I thought it was going to be sunny this afternoon and actually no, it's raining. So trying to forecast out 10 years is pretty tough. So with that in mind, with the idea of, we have these forecasts of 2025, we stretch them even further. What will the world look like in 2030? We came back with about 10 different trends, 10 different ways in which we think the world's going to look in 2030. We've got about 5 of them for you on today's show. We'll do part 2, another 5. Let's start with the first one. Monica, you were looking at the world of digital advertising. What do you expect to see for digital advertising in 2030?
Right. Well, starting with this, we look at several companies and see what are their revenues and contribution to digital advertising in the US and globally. Today, we're talking about the US, but we want to see, who are the top 3? Is that going to change? And anybody who's been following this at all will know that Google, Facebook, and Amazon are currently in the top 3, affectionately named triopoly when we talk about it internally. And we all know what that means. A little less nefarious than most people think of that word. But when we start out with where we are today or where we expect to be today, Google right there on top with 29% share of the U.S. digital ad spending market is the biggest single player by itself. And that's not surprising. Google is where we all go to learn everything that we know, what we ask our smart speakers, for recommendations or for what is an armadillo and lots of other things. Can you please play that new Katy Perry song for me? And so, yes, a mammal, funny enough, that lays eggs, but that's another thing entirely. But yeah, so we know that Google would be really dominant and strong in search, and that should continue, actually. But one thing that's a reality for Google is that search dominance is really their sandbox. That's really where they play. So as we think about the next 10 years or the next 9 years, because we're looking at 2030, Google is losing some of the market share just because others are growing a bit faster. There aren't a lot of new search players that are entering the market, but one probably unexpected one is e-commerce search. Google, while they have Google Shops, I believe it's called, Google Shopping, it has not been as successful, I would say, as big player Amazon and many others in the e-commerce space. And that is where we see some encroachment upon Google's share there, not making it any less dominant than other players, but definitely encroaching upon their market. So as e-commerce has grown and the activity around it has grown, we see that Amazon and even other e-commerce players are taking up some of the search share that would have gone to Google, and that's really becoming Amazon's game. Amazon and others, I should say, becoming their game. And when we think about down the line, 29% this year, Google's share is likely to continue to fall but very slightly, fall to around 27%, we would say, to 2030. And that's a big deal. Google, like I said, is really dominant. But one thing to keep in mind is that Google's share falling below, say, a quarter of the market, 25%, would be really an unlikely scenario. So what we have here is it basically getting somewhat close to that number, but still a little bit higher than that 25% share, just given their sheer size. And then when you think about second player in line, Facebook, because of the strength that it has gained over the years with, just Facebook as a core social network company, but acquiring lots of different arms and legs with Instagram, with WhatsApp, and other messaging services, it's becoming a bigger company in its own right. And so while it is now at 25%, a quarter of the digital ad spending market, it will likely continue to grow. So it does not take too much from Google, but it grows in a space that was owned by other media. So growing from 25% to possibly rivaling Google, getting up to maybe a little bit over Google is not a huge stretch. So we're saying by the end of what we're calling the extended forecast, if you will, 2030, we could likely see Facebook at 28%. So just 1% outpacing Google. Probably a lot of contentious thoughts about that, but it really stems from us seeing that Facebook continues to grow its mass and coverage, including in areas like e-commerce, social commerce, which is a subset of e-commerce, and that becoming a real factor in user growth. And then, of course, advertisers. Advertisers want to follow the eyeballs wherever they went, and their properties are still very popular.
And where's Facebook today?
Facebook today at a quarter of digital ad.
25%
right.
today?
So 25% today.
Okay. And how about Amazon?
Yeah. So Amazon is somewhat of a newcomer to the game of dominance when it comes to the US ad market, but not a small player by any stretch, not small fries. When we look at where they are today, they take up around 11% of the digital ad spending market. That will grow another 5 percentage points or so by 2030. And that's at a very rapid clip. Right now, our forecast continues through 2023. So that's actually where our forecast drops off. And then from there, we expect it to slow somewhat as it becomes very dominant in the space, but still continue to grow share as it marches into areas like pharmaceuticals and starts to play in other categories within e-commerce that maybe weren't as dominant before. So we do expect it to continue to grow share. And one thing I will say about the top three is altogether, they are reaching 65% of the market, but they'll still grow together. Even with Google losing some small share by the end, they'll still all grow together to reach 71% of the market, given our current trends today.
Okay, so in 2030, the top three digital ad players will own 71% of the market. Today it's 65. We think 2030 it will be 71%. We think Google will tick down a few points. Facebook will tick up a few points, threatening Google's first place. And then Amazon will gain 5 points and will be in a strong third position.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fascinating, just the fact that the three are gaining share. I mean, based off of what, Monica just explained, I mean, the real competition will come, and I think that'll be the case, 9 years from now, from e-commerce and from search. So is there a possibility that Walmart or Shopify might gain some share or eat into the top threes? I don't know. That was something that came to mind.
Yeah, I think that's totally possible. E-commerce as a whole is going to rise all boats, so to speak. Walmart and others are actually gaining on this trend and will likely continue to be dominant in the e-commerce space.
I'm going to be speaking with Eric Hagstrom actually about that exact question a bit later on this week, getting his take on who is that fourth player, who is going to be the fourth star that emerges, maybe not as far as 2030, but I'm going to ask him today and over the next couple of years, years? Who can we expect to be the kind of fourth star in the digital ad space? Fascinating. Monica, thank you so much. Let's move on to our second trend, online shopping. Cindy, what did we discover online shopping is going to look like in 2030?
Yeah, so we think that by 2030, that over 1/3 of all retail spending will be made online. And, that's really because of all the inroads that were finally made last year in grocery specifically, as people, have become more comfortable buying online. I think that these trends will just accelerate. And so we're predicting that in 10 years, about 25%, or I guess $1 in $4 spent on groceries will be made via online channels. And, to think of it another way, that's kind of similar to saying that 1 out of every 4 grocery trips that you make a month would be made online. And so to me, that's not unreasonable to say. And to counter that, you might think that 1/3 of retail spending could, we might be underestimating. It might sound a little low, but we also have to take into account the predominantly offline categories like auto and gas that we include in our retail numbers. And unless we start seeing, major disruption in the auto industry, we have sort of, over the last couple of years seen, with Carvana and Tesla. But unless that really starts to disrupt the market, e-commerce will likely still be capped at around 70% penetration levels. And that's because auto and gas account for about 30% of retail.
Can gas ever be sold online?
No.
Could you ever buy gas and have it
I
delivered
guess if
to
you
your
have
house?
it delivered.
Never say never.
Never say never.
I'm not saying storing large stockpiles of gasoline at your house is a good idea, but could you not envision a world where you click buy and they show up and you can just, as opposed to having to go to find a gas station every time you get home, you just tip, similar to how you put gas in a lawnmower.
Right, but I feel like gas is this product that is really based on supply and demand. There must be supply. And, we've seen over the last month or two with the gas shortage scare, people were going to gas stations and hoarding their gas.
Yeah, we probably shouldn't let people buy online.
Yes, we probably shouldn't let people buy online.
It's a terrible idea. So you said 1/3 of retail spending being online. That's up from 14% today.
Yes,
right?
just 14%. And then I looked at, 10 years prior, so like 2010, and e-commerce was really, it was just a fraction. It was like less than 5% of total retail sales. So by 2030, and really the major categories that would be driving this are the strong holdouts, and that's mainly food and beverage and health, personal care, and beauty. By the end of the forecast, I have about 1/4 of food and beverage spending being made online.
Right, so they're the categories that still have room to even grow.
Yes, there's still room.
Okay, 10% of grocery online today, 25% we think will be online by 2030. Any other thoughts from anyone else on this prediction?
I hope this means produce is going to be fresh everywhere, just everywhere. We can just count on that.
Yeah, I mean, with curbside pickup and things like this, I think it was something maybe a couple of years ago we wouldn't have even thought of necessarily, and I think that does create a higher ceiling in a way. So, but I think that number is it makes sense from what Cindy just explained.
Yeah, curbside is just this huge transformative activity that just, accelerated last year. And, a lot of retailers like Walmart, for example, I think in their last earnings, they had a really interesting quote about why I think they're sunsetting their automated lockers in store. And one of the reasons was they said consumers told us last year they want to pick up items in one place, and that one place is curbside. They want to do it outside.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, I think this means that US actually will move up in rank to the 4th place out of all the markets in the world. I think it's going to, with the 33%, I think it moves up to 4th place, just behind China, UK, and South Korea.
Fascinating.
Right now it's at 6th.
Wait, so that's the current ranking at the minute? China has the most amount of shopping online, then the UK, then South Korea?
So right now US is in the 6th place, actually. So with this, it will go up to the 4th place. And I don't think it will ever catch up to China. China is going to surpass 50% by next year. So
Right.
With 33% in 2030 for the US, it's still a long way more.
And Shalene, why is that? Why is China able to be so far ahead in terms of how people want to shop for things, but in terms of buying things online?
Right. I think China was a very special case. I think it kind of leapfrogged the traditional ways of doing a lot of things. Payments, and it's online for a long time. That ease of paying for stuff online, it kind of leapfrogged the whole credit card thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it's just that the platforms in China are so dominant. And they've also expanded so far into the rural areas, and they've also pioneered new ways of shopping, like, live streaming e-commerce is extremely hot there. So they're really the leaders in e-commerce right now.
And I think the one other thing to point out too is that, the US is predominantly brick and mortar. And that, again, that goes back to this concept where the US has the most retail square footage per person in the world. Mm-hmm. Like retail shopping, brick and mortar shopping, malls, that's ingrained in our culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was just going to add, if brands or merchants are listening to this, I would say shoot for the stars. That 33% number, it could be higher.
It could be higher.
How China has transformed digital shopping.
It better not be, Cindy. It better be exactly 34%.
Yeah, exactly.
Otherwise, we will come find you. Let's move on to our next trend, digital banking. Shalene, what were you looking at in the world of digital banking with regards to 2030, what the world's going to look like?
Well, yeah, in 2030, we expect that almost 85% of the population will access their bank account digitally at least once per month. And of those who bank online, 90% of them will do so via the mobile device. But in-branch banking will not become a thing of the past in 2030. It will still exist. So 60% of bank account holders will still visit a branch at least once a year. And we don't mean them going to the branch to withdraw money from the ATM. So ATM visits are not included in this number. So people are actually going to the branch to do, real things like, I don't know, deposit cash or get a certified check, things like that.
Okay.
But what's interesting also is that, while people are still going to the branches to get things done, there's also a portion of people who are getting used to the idea that totally banking online and not ever seeing a service personnel in person is totally acceptable. So by 2030, over 1 in 4 people will have a bank account at a digital-only bank. And these are banks that do not operate physical branches. So everything is done via phone or internet.
Okay. So 85% of people will bank online. So we're saying 15% of people won't bank online.
Yeah, 15% of people won't even pay their credit card online, which is weird to me. So I don't know what they're doing. They're writing a check, I think, and sending it off.
In 2030.
Would some of that number include unbanked people as well?
Well, yeah. Some of that. So it's 85% of the population. So
got it. Okay.
So that would make sense.
There are some that are unbanked, and I imagine most of the other folks are in the older demographic.
So I was going to ask, who do you think are the holdouts? In 10 years' time?
It would be the 65 plus, I think. But
in 10 years, the 55 plus have
aged into that
the next age group.
It would be the really old, maybe.
I mean,
we did say people are living longer.
Yes,
there's people who are going to be 100 plus.
We forget sometimes that we still have the silent generation. We don't talk about them, but there's still a lot of them. Maybe it'll be the baby boomers at that point, but some of the older baby boomers, I could see it. Yeah.
Yeah, it is once a month too, I guess.
Right.
The frequency.
Right. I'm still pretty surprised that over half of people will still need to go into a branch. Just, we're looking at trends that are current today and extrapolating that to the future. But, if we could do all of our fundamental methodology on all of this, I can only imagine that banks are offering some of those very involved services like the certified check, having a notary, all of those things, that they're making some of that available online over the next 9 years, and just trying to take cost out of the overhead cost of having a branch in the first place. So I wouldn't be surprised if it comes down from that number and maybe closer to half, but it still shocks me that I spend so little time in a branch. I don't even know if I get to that 1 time per year number, but I can't imagine it being just so ingrained, but certainly some people just prefer that.
Yeah, there's a relationship aspect too. I think some people just like that. So you can get some fees waived if you go in and speak to your relationship manager. So maybe some people do that.
Yeah.
And neobanks are still such a sort of new concept that it definitely is tough to extrapolate the trends we're seeing now 9 years in the future because it's still so new here. So
what's really interesting as well is that, like, as an individual, what share of your time will you spend doing these different things? Because as you said, with a neobank, these digital only banks, 28% of people will have an account at a digital online bank, but they could still have an account at a bank where there's branches.
Right.
And so will it be that you go into the branch, 5 times a year and you spend, 90% of your time doing things online? And so what's the makeup going to be as an individual in terms of how you interact with your bank? All right, folks, time for a quick word from our sponsor, Basis Technologies, and then we'll be right back with the second half of our episode, looking at the media world in 2030, where we're going to be looking at pay TV, digital video, and esports. Today's podcast is made possible by Basis Technologies. Basis Technologies has created a digital advertising platform that connects people, automates processes, and unifies channels, bringing together programmatic, site direct, search, social, and CTV into one single interface. And through the power of automation, Basis enable brands, agencies, and publishers to build and operate a healthy, secure, efficient, and profitable advertising organization. Ready to take control of your advertising? Just go to basis.net today. That's www.basis.net. Basis Technologies, the future of advertising has arrived. All right, folks, so in the first half of the show, we looked at 2030. In 9-10 years' time into the future, what is the world of digital ads, shopping, and banks going to look like? And in the second half, which is right now, we're going to be looking at what the world in 2030 will look like for pay TV, digital video, and esports. Okay, we're back. We've got a couple more predictions for you for what the world's going to look like in 2030. Esports. Oscar, you looked at this one for us. Esports users, esports ads. What's the world of esports look like in 10 years?
Yeah, great. So I'd first like to explain kind of how we define it when we think of esports users. It includes it's internet users who watch an organized gaming competition. And this is only hosted on digital